The Lobster is an interesting movie because not only does it take place in a world that is different from ours, but the characters are people who behave nothing like normal people.
Help! Help!
The story follows this man, named David. David was moved into a hotel after his wife left him for another man. He and the other guests at the hotel are given 45 days to stay there to find another mate. What happens at the end of the 45 days? Are they kicked out of the hotel? Yeah, they're kicked out of the hotel, but they're also turned into an animal. They get to pick an animal, and then they get turned into it, so the stakes are high. As captivating and strange as the movie is, there's one scene in particular that carries a lot with it, given its length. This scene is the hot tub scene. The actual shot of the hot tub begins at the 45-48 mark of the movie and ends only a minute and 26 seconds later. The scene consists of David and another hotel guest sitting in different hot tubs. David gets up and asks to join the woman in hers. They exchange nothing but silence before the woman decides to choke on her martini olive. David just sits there and watches. He doesn't try to help or even flinch for 33 seconds. After she falls over dead, she reveals that she wasn't actually choking, and the two decide that they're a romantic match. This scene makes almost no sense by itself, even knowing the premise for the movie. There is still no context to determine either character's motivations for behaving in such strange ways. None of the characters in this movie have rational ways of thinking per se, and that has to be accepted because really, this is just a weird movie. But the hot tub scene, though absurd, demonstrates a major point in David's character arc that gives the film its name. So what happened here? In context, the movie is about how people make unhealthy life decisions because dying single seems unbearable. Except in the movie they don't die, they're turned into animals. David desperately doesn't want to be turned into an animal, and at this point in the film, he only has a week left of his stay. So what does he do here that convinces the woman that they're a match? He lets her believe that he would let her die next to him if she were really choking. How does he know that would work? Why does it work? The reason why has very much to do with all the characters' weird ways of thinking. There is something in this world called defining characteristics. Everyone only has one defining characteristic.
My defining characteristic is that I have a very beautiful smile.
This can range from having a lisp, or a bloody nose, to a love for butter biscuits. David's defining characteristic is that he's nearsighted.
Does he wear glasses or contact lenses?
The woman's defining characteristic is that she's heartless.
That woman you were talking to has no feelings whatsoever. She feels nothing at all.
So just because she's heartless, why would she want to be with a man who would let her die? Well, the defining characteristics play a bigger role than just labeling the guests. For some reason, the people in this movie believe they can only fall in love with someone who shares the same characteristic as them. John, the man with the limp, was married to a woman with a limp, and exclusively looks for women who have limps.
I think I saw a woman with a limp.
It's just a sprained ankle. She'll be walking normally again in a few days.
That's a shame.
The woman with great hair refuses to match with David because his hair is dry, and there's always a chance that he can go bald. The woman with constant nosebleeds marries and has a child with John because he purposely gives himself nosebleeds. By this logic, it only makes sense that the heartless woman would only ever want to match with a man who is also heartless, no matter what life-threatening risk it would put her in. But why does David want to be with a heartless woman? This question is answered by the narrator just 3 minutes prior to the hot tub scene.
One day, as he was playing golf, he thought that it is more difficult to pretend that you do have feelings when you don't, than to pretend you don't have feelings when you do.
The last part of this line refers to David's plan to pretend he doesn't have feelings so he can be with the heartless woman. But what does the first part refer to? Why does he know it's difficult to pretend he has feelings when he doesn't? 30 minutes into the movie, David rides on a bus next to the woman who loves butter biscuits. This woman is extremely friendly to David. She first invites him to go on a walk. After he blows her off, she offers him a bag of butter biscuits to give to his brother, who happens to be a dog. When he continues to show no interest in forming any social connection with her, she offers to come to his room anytime and have sex with him any way he wants. But no matter how much effort this woman puts into forming a relationship with David, he shows no interest, and can't muster any emotions to reciprocate. It is only after the butter biscuit woman leaves him a voicemail that he decides on his plan to court the heartless woman, as it is easier to hide his emotions than to fake them.
I hope she suffers quite a bit before she dies. I just hope her pathetic screams can't be heard from my room. Because I was thinking about having a lie down, and I need peace and quiet.
So now the scene makes sense with the movie's context, but what does any of this have to do with lobsters? Lobsters are only ever talked about twice throughout the movie, and no lobster is even shown once. The reason is because David wants to become a lobster if his 45 days were to ever run out. But why a lobster? Because according to David, lobsters live for over 100 years, are blue-blooded like aristocrats, and stay fertile all their lives. But I ask again, why a lobster? If a lobster was so important that they titled the movie after it, then it probably wasn't because they were blue-blooded like aristocrats. Let's take a look at the title, The Lobster. It isn't lobster, and it isn't a lobster. And it isn't the man who chooses to be a lobster. The title is The Lobster, meaning the movie was already about a lobster. It implies that David is the lobster. But how is he a lobster? What significance would a lobster share with David? In the moment that David decides to repress anything he truly feels, he puts on a tough exterior, much like how lobsters have tough exteriors, called exoskeletons. But there's something under that hard exterior, both in David and in lobsters. The lack of a spine. David is as spineless as a lobster because he chooses to live a lie rather than start a new life as a lobster. In this scene, David kills off an important piece of himself, analogous to how lobsters are killed in hot water. The hot tub scene is short, very short, but taken out of its broth, it doesn't mean anything. It seems absurd on its own, but when you have hope that the rest of the movie can clear things up, you realize that the whole thing was always absurd. As absurd as the scene and the rest of the movie turns out to be, at the end, it does have meaning and it does make sense. For 38 days, David dreaded being turned into a lobster, but ironically, his plan to hide what he felt, act like someone he wasn't, to trick someone to believing he was their match, is what truly turned him into a lobster.